The agency wants to know if Mitchiel would make guest appearances in their shows for a generous fee, and after some intense thought, he declines. Jia's confused why, but he explains that he's just an ordinary person. Mitchiel's sweating and asks if Jia's scared standing in front of a camera, but she's confused. Mitchiel explains that he's scared to be on camera, and someone like him isn't suited to be a guest on a show, and it should be someone special. Suddenly, Jia takes a picture of Mitchiel and he tries to shield his face. Jia explains that she just took a picture of someone special like he said, but Mitchiel's confused. She asks who Mitchiel thinks decides who's special, and she suggests it is the person with the camera. Jia explains that just like how the 4-leaf clover means good luck, a 3-leaf clover means happiness. Mitchiel's amazed by Jia's knowledge, but she lied. Why would the number of leaves change its meaning? Mitchiel is disappointed it isn't true. But even though it's not real, Jia will continue to believe it's true because if she keeps believing it, it will become a symbol of happiness for her and maybe it'll really mean happiness one day. Mitchiel agrees and laughs about how Jia is truly a writer of all time because she's so good at saying cheesy things like it's nothing. Jia gets embarrassed and says there's nothing cheesy about it and her point was that being special is all about your frame of mind. Suddenly, Jia notices a flash and it's Mitchiel taking pictures of her. She asks what Mitchiel thinks he's doing and he explains that he's taking pictures of his precious and special person. This makes Jia blush and she desperately tries to stop him. Mitchiel set this moment as his phone's wallpaper and is admiring it at work. When Sangyu asks why he's smiling, Mitchiel says his wife is just so adorable and Sangyu is devastated. Mitchiel asks if Sangyu takes pictures like on dates, and right before he says Suyeon doesn't like them, she emerges from the shadows to shut Sangyu up so people don't get the wrong idea. But everyone already knows they're dating. Jia also set Mitchiel as her wallpaper and is admiring it at work, saying that he's cute. Nari wants to see what's so cute, but she's disturbed by what she sees and tells Jia to be mindful of the single people around her. But Jia really thinks Mitchiel is cute. Regardless, Nari mentions how a famous producer is filming a variety show in the cafe, which leaves Jia speechless. The scene shifts to Yenduek and a thug-like producer named Taeseok Kim telling Yenduek to not try and butter him up and stop beating around the bush. People call this man the production maestro, and while he doesn't mind the compliments, he's washed and has long since left being a genius of the film industry. But Yenduek says Taeseok is still relevant because of how much they're offering him for his work, but he thinks that's even more suspicious and asks Yenduek why he really wants him here. Yenduek was told by the iced hot Americano lady to get Taeseok to do a variety show and get Jia in on it and was told to figure everything out himself. But Yenduek doesn't know what to do. Taeseok is like a burned-out match. All his fame is in the past, and he's financially stable, so it'll be hard to convince him to do anything he doesn't want to. But suddenly, Yenduek has a genius idea and asks if Taeseok likes coffee. They soon enter the cafe and Jia is annoyed to see Yenduek. She asks why he's here and he says to get coffee. Yenduek orders an iced Americano and Taeseok asks to have their best coffee and Jia acts like this is a groundbreaking request. Taeseok explains that since she's the coffee expert, he'll have whatever she thinks is the best. But Jia says she's not a coffee expert. Yenduek urges her to just suggest something and after some intense thinking, Jia confidently says all their coffee sucks and they don't know how to respond. Afterwards, they're outside and Taeseok asks if they really just went there for a cup of coffee. Yenduek tells Taeseok to recall Jia's brutally honest rating of the coffee and opinions, and while Taeseok doesn't comment on it, Yenduek knows Jia won him over. Talent is somewhat of a curse that someone with talent can't escape from. Take a master ceramist. If one day she gets sick of it and abandons her craft, how would you influence that genius when they're already sick of money and fame? This seems like an impossible question, but the answer is clay. Not just any clay, the best clay. To the master ceramist, the clay is extraordinary, and they can't stand to watch such excellent materials go to waste. In short, if a master chef sees a premium ingredient used in the worst possible way, they will be furious and want to work with it. As such, Taeseok mentions how he hasn't seen something as great as Jia in a long time and asks Yenduek to discuss their upcoming schedule for the production. With this, Taeseok's passion has been reignited. At the cafe, the filming has started and Nari's excited that a real TV station is here. She wonders if she will end up on TV and be cast for something else. But Jia doesn't seem to care as they're not here to film them. But when the cameras are doing a test, Jia smiles. Nari notices Jia's instant switch, meaning Jia's secretly excited. At home, Jia's getting ready and Mitchiel's wondering why she's doing all that when she has a day off today. But Jia points out that she's not an engineering student, so taking a shower isn't a big event and there are times where you want to be clean. Mitchiel interprets this as Jia getting ready for the horizontal tango and asks if he should pick up supplies at the convenience store. But that's not what Jia meant. The scene shifts to Jia stirring a face mask mixture and Mitchiel is laying down questioning why he needs it. So Jia aggressively applies the mixture and tells Mitchiel to be grateful because he's getting a facial for free. Jia switches to full customer service mode and compliments Mitchiel's fair skin and asks if he gets facials somewhere else. Mitchiel explains that his wifey sometimes puts stuff on his face and Jia is shocked. He continues by saying he somehow ended up married, and when Jia asks how things have been, Mitchiel explains that things have been pretty good and he hopes his wifey feels the same way. Jia asks if he has any complaints and Mitchiel says he can't think of any, but when Jia presses him about it, Mitchiel explains that his wifey does this one thing where she sometimes does these weird bits and wishes she gave him a heads up first. Jia aggressively applies more mixture in response and Mitchiel mentions that he hopes all this isn't a dream. He still finds it hard to believe that he's with his wonderful wifey and has even pinched himself a few times to check if it's real. Jia starts intensely blushing and then leans over Mitchiel's face saying that there's something even better than his skin and asks if he knows what it is while giving him a kiss. This thing is serotonin. It's a hormone you secrete when you feel loved, or maybe giving love. Jia doesn't know, but she knows it's good for dealing with stress, your skin, and immune system. Suddenly, Mitchiel calls out Jia's name and says he thinks they can use some more serotonin. He rapidly approaches Jia and an abundance of serotonin was secreted that night during backshot. The next day, Nari walks the streets with her skin glowing, so much so that even Siyu compliments her. But when Jia walks in, her skin is totally translucent and Nari wants to know how she pulled it off. Jia laughs and explains that you just have to be loved. Entertainment used to primarily describe arts such as theater, movies, art, and music, but now it's generally used to describe shows, or comedy to be more specific. Instead of well-defined plots, reality shows that leave the story up to the characters have become incredibly popular, and the person who sets the stage for these is Taeseok. But Jia is unimpressed by him and notes that he wasn't just a weird customer. The scene shifts to Nari asking Jia if she'll look good on camera. But Jia doesn't care because they're not the ones being filmed. Nari says it's possible because they had to sign a contract for the show. But Jia explains that's only because the show's being shot at the cafe. But Nari points out that that's the whole point because if she's included in a shot by chance and steals the show, then she can become the main character for a reality show that goes all the way to Hollywood. Jia thinks Nari's dreaming too big, but who can blame Nari, and she asks Jia if she ever imagined something like that. Jia denies it, but she knows that's definitely a lie and says it might be okay. Nari's excited that she's right. Suddenly Taeseok appears and Siyu presents him with a coffee on the house. Nari and Jia are disgusted by this behavior. The scene shifts to Yanju who's not pleased with how Yenduek is doing business. He initially promised to only do an interview in the cafe, but now it's a reality show and he didn't tell her in advance. So Yenduek offers to treat Yanju to dinner even though she's already incredibly rich. But Yanju's most concerned about how Yenduek included someone she didn't know in the production. Suddenly Yenduek presents Yanju with an orange flower saying it reminded him of her. Yanju questions this, but he explains that the color suits her and he promises to tell her things sooner next time and to not be mad at him. Regardless, Yenduek mentions how they are bound by the same goals. But Yanju thinks that's ridiculous, but she isn't mad anymore. Before Yenduek leaves, he says he really did buy the flower thinking of her and tells Yanju to not get the wrong idea. Yanju doesn't take it seriously, but as she twirls her hair, maybe she did. Back at the cafe, Taeseok observes Jia and Nari talking and he thinks Jia has aura and has what it takes to be a star. Then, a professional MC named Yanju walks in the cafe. There's a wide variety of people in this world. Some are good at eating, some are good at studying, others at dancing and still others at singing. But there are some who chisel away at the talent they have until it becomes a jewel, and we call those people professionals. A small percentage of professionals who are loved by all are known as stars. But even stars have people they aspire to be, and those are icons. Yanju is one of those icons. Jia instantly recognizes him, but she immediately locks in when Nari comments how the famous MC is here. Jia claims she thinks it's someone else, but Nari knows he's the real thing and wonders if she can get his autograph. But Jia tells her to calm down because acting all desperate will get her nowhere. But Nari points out that Jia is no different because she has paper behind her back to get his autograph. Jia says this will just make it easier if he pays by card. But Nari calls her out because you don't need to sign for purchases under $50. Jia says it's possible, but Nari knows she's full of it. Myonghan and Taeseok are now talking and Myonghan questions why Taeseok is doing a reality show, because he thought he was done with those. Taeseok explains the offer he received and explains that he couldn't stop thinking about Jia ever since he came across her. Myonghan thinks this means she has talent, but Taeseok says Jia doesn't have talent. She's just entertaining. Jia's now busy serving customers and someone taps her shoulder, so she asks if they want coffee. But they don't and explain that they need to start filming soon and ask to assist Jia with her wardrobe. Jia's confused because she's not supposed to be in the show, but she's actually the guest today and Jia can't believe what she's hearing. Jia changes into a stylish outfit and curses Yanju because she knows she's involved because something fell off the last few days. But Jia's more annoyed about Yanduek feigning ignorance even though she knows he's enjoying this. Nari is jealous of Jia, but Jia doesn't feel good about it and is so nervous she thinks she might throw up. Nari comments how this is the first time she's seen Jia dressed up and Jia gets embarrassed. They then call in the other guest and Jia was told nothing about this. As he enters, everyone turns their head and stares at him and Jia can't believe this is real. The other guest is Mitchiel dressed up like the average K-drama protagonist. There's an old saying that says drawing lines on a pumpkin doesn't make it a watermelon. It means that no amount of effort can overcome innate talent. But after seeing Mitchiel, Jia thinks that principle doesn't apply here because maybe Mitchiel has been a watermelon since the very beginning. Jia is still processing Mitchiel showing up and doesn't respond to Mitchiel waving his hand in her face. So Mitchiel tells the staff that his wife isn't feeling well, so they can't do the shoot and Jia immediately locks in and says she's fine. Jia asks why Mitchell's here and he explains that Jia set this all up for them, but she doesn't know what he's talking about. He explains that a couple of days ago, he was approached by a man named Yenduek who said Jia was going to be on a show called Famous Interview and was asked to join. Jia asks if Mitchiel thought to check in with her first, but Mitchiel says he already did because on Jia's birthday, she said she'd prepare more special experiences for them to make sure he isn't bored and Mitchiel assumed she wanted to surprise him with this. Jia talking about being filmed on camera the other day confirmed this thought for Mitchiel. Jia can't believe what she's hearing and asks if anything suspicious crossed his mind when he heard about this show, but Mitchiel only thought this was perfect for Jia. Jia has given up on reasoning with Mitchiel. Whenever Jia is with Mitchiel, she always gets wrapped up in weird situations. Meanwhile, everyone's admiring Mitchiel and mentioning how he must have been born ready for the cameras. But Jia knows Mitchiel is actually beyond nervous and one step away from fainting and wonders if he will be okay today. Suddenly someone mentions how she would totally be flirting with Mitchiel if he wasn't married and Jia didn't predict this. Right now, Mitchiel is at his best and the epitome of a guy who any girl would fall for. Jia already dealt with the drama from the whole handshake thing and couldn't sleep from just that. So can she let Mitchiel go on TV like this? But it's too late to back out now. But suddenly, Jia gets an idea and asks Nari for a pen and some paper. The filming has now started and Myonghan introduces the show as being about interviewing people of all walks of life. He introduces the first guests as the couple who were deserted on the island, but Mitchiel appears with his face covered by a piece of paper. The production staff wonder if this is okay, but Taeseok says it's fine because they're not live and he's curious if Jia can follow through with the idea. Myonghan asks why Mitchell's wearing that paper mask and Jia explains that since her husband is so handsome, letting his face out on TV could lead to trouble for her. The audience goes wild and Jia says that before she reveals his face, she needs the viewers to know that he used to look like a nerd. But now, he looks like a K-drama protagonist, and it's all thanks to her, so Mitchiel is officially property of Jia Han and tells the viewers to not even think about falling for him. When the episode aired, Jia's mom dropped her food in shock seeing this. When Jia watched it, she had to cover her eyes in embarrassment. Afterwards, when Jia and Mitchiel enter an elevator, they're instantly recognized as that couple from the show Myonghan is doing, and they ask for their autograph. Jia thinks she isn't a celebrity and wonders if Myonghan really has that much influence to make her famous overnight. But Mitchiel is the one who benefited from it the most because he has a similar hairstyle to Myonghan and the fans are going wild over his Chad-like appearance. Jia bets Mitchell's enjoying his fame, but he isn't even after being asked for his autograph. But Jia says opportunities like this don't come around often and tells Mitchiel to enjoy it while he can. At the cafe, Nari laughs about Jia becoming a celebrity overnight, but Jia says it's really not a big deal. Suddenly Yanju appears behind them and tells them to stop gossiping during working hours. But it really doesn't matter because the cafe is empty even after the show aired because Mitchiel stole most of the spotlight, and Yanju asks if Jia is okay. Jia's confused, so Yanju asks if Mitchiel's been coming home late with an unfamiliar scent on him lately. But when Jia mentions this to Mitchiel, she recalls how he always comes home right after work, so nothing has changed. But Mitchiel reveals that people have been talking to him all day, but he's more concerned about Jia because she looked really pretty on camera. While Jia did look pretty, the producers wanted to portray her as a villain, so they photoshopped her eyes and put stickers on her face, which made her the butt of many jokes on social media. Jia's kicking her legs on the floor just thinking about it, but when Mitchiel asks what she's doing, Jia says she's just stretching. Regardless, Mitchiel tells Jia to not worry too much because this popularity will soon go away, but what Mitchiel said couldn't be further from the truth. As time passed, Mitchell's popularity only continued to skyrocket, resulting in him being recognized in public, his co-workers wanting him at the team dinner to impress the big boss, and even an exclusive interview. Mitchell's drained from all this attention, and when Jia asks what's wrong, Mitchiel asks if he really needs to go to the interview. But Jia reminds him that he promised to go and pushes him forward. Suddenly, Mitchiel hugs Jia so he can charge his Jia energy, which is stronger than magnetism. Jia's confused, but Mitchiel says it will only take 10 seconds and counts down. But when he's supposed to get to 0, he says a half a second is left, and then a quarter, and so on. Jia believes he received enough Jia energy and urges Mitchiel to get going and tells him to be careful. Just like how dust piles up on shelves, group chats pile up on your phone over time. For Mitchiel, some of these group chats are inactive. But ever since he came into the spotlight, everyone suddenly wanted to see him, and Mitchiel feels like he has no choice but to say yes. So Jia's complaining about Mitchiel meeting his old friends who came out of nowhere to her sister Jimin, and she asks if Jia is actually just worried a girl will be there. Jia denies this, so Jimin suggests that if she's so worried, then she should just go with him and tell them to not even think about falling for her man just because he's handsome like she did on the show. This makes Jia stomp her feet in embarrassment and tells Jimin to stop. Jimin says it's a compliment, but Jia would rather her make fun of her like she normally does. Regardless, Jimin reminds Jia that she has nothing to worry about because Mitchiel would never betray her. But even after that day, Mitchell's friends still all wanted to hang out with him, and he couldn't help but say yes, to the point where he even skipped going to the gym. But Jia reminds herself that she has nothing to worry about because Mitchiel isn't the type to look at other girls. But as she's saying this, she sees Mitchiel alone with another girl. Jia thinks she just caught Mitchiel cheating, but he says he has a good reason for this, and the girl next to him introduces herself as junior reporter Yanju. She's with Mitchiel because she wanted to meet Jia and then hands Jia a permanent marker and asks her to sign the back of her shirt. Jia's confused why Ayoung would want that, so she pulls out Jia's debut novel and asks Jia to sign that, instead referring to Jia as her pen name Flaming Hot Chicken Feet, which is supposed to be a secret. Jia doesn't know how to respond and says Ayoung has the wrong person. But she tells Jia to just admit it while listing Jia's accomplishments as an author and mentions her attempts at writing BL. This makes Jia embarrassed and demands to know how Ayoung found her. So Ayoung reveals it's because Jia's picture is in her books, and Jia can't believe she was so foolish. Ayoung's really here because she was asked to write an article about Jia, but before she tells Jia the details, Jia signs her back and Ayoung's life's mission has been completed. When Ayoung heard Jia quit writing, it felt like the end of the world to her. Jia tries to claim that she wasn't that great, but Ayoung says that isn't true because when she read her first book, a shock ran through her body, and she bought 3 copies. One for reading, one to give away, and one for storage. Jia listens to Ayoung gush about how much she loves her books, but Jia knows this can only end one way, and that is with her asking when Jia's next book is coming out. This is the #1 question all writers get. When Jia was still writing, she could just say it will come out soon, but now that she's stepped away from it, she can't say that anymore. Jia's lack of response makes Ayoung ask if she's quit writing, and she asks if Jia really abandoned her 8,062,000,000 fans. Hearing this left Jia with only one choice, and she says that her next book will be released someday. Ayoung is happy to hear this and runs off with a smile. Jia sighs that it's over, but Mitchiel asks if she's really going to start writing again. Jia says that of course she isn't going to because she worked so hard to break out of her self-imposed isolation years ago, and it's not like she said she would start writing today. She said someday, which means maybe she'll pick it back up in a few decades. But the reality is that she isn't mentally ready to start writing again. But she can't admit this to Mitchiel. The scene shifts to Yanju looking at Ayoung's business card, which can only mean one thing. At the cafe, Jia sees a comment online saying that she's flaming hot chicken feet and she doesn't know how this happened. So Jia calls Ayoung to make sure it wasn't her, but she claims to know nothing about it. But Jia thinks the timing is suspicious because the information got leaked right after Ayoung ran into her. So Ayoung explains that since reporters make money from views, she would never give up information this valuable for free. Ayoung offers to look into who leaked it using her connections, and Jia is grateful for the help. After she hangs up, Ayoung stretches and immediately gets hit with the newspaper by the editor-in-chief who's asking who she's tormenting this time. But Ayoung claims this is an expression of endearment for Jia, and the editor-in-chief is scared to get any attention from her. Jia sent over the video with the comment on it. But this comment was actually written by Ayoung, so she deletes it and writes another one using a different account to make it seem like she did something. She was told that doing this would get Jia to start writing again, but she's confused about what this has to do with Jia's new book. At Jia's apartment, she sees that comment she's been stressing about has been deleted and she's impressed that Ayoung used her connections to get rid of it. Jia and Mitchiel celebrate, but they could have never predicted what was about to happen. Take this comment for example. Few people see the comment, and even fewer people who are interested in it pay any attention to it. But when comments about a specific topic get deleted, more people start to notice. People who previously didn't care about who the author flaming hot chicken feet is start to care. Once people start paying attention, it snowballs out of control. When Jia checks the comments the next day, she can't believe a comment about her has 500 likes and a whole video about discovering who she is was made. Jia when she discovers the Streisand effect. So Jia calls Yanju and blames him for this whole situation. She had a bad feeling ever since he showed up and ever since she appeared on the show. She's now in the spotlight and now that her alias has been outed, she wants him to do something about it. Yanju agrees he can help, which makes Jia relieved. But Yanju asks what exactly she wants him to do and asks if she wants him to sue everyone who's spreading the rumors. Jia didn't expect it to be that serious. But Yanju was just kidding and asks on what grounds they can even sue on. They can't sue for defamation because everything they're claiming is true. All Jia wants is for everyone to stop talking about it. But Yanju asks if she thought this through before doing the show. With her face in her book cover and pictures and articles being available online from when she was still writing, it's no wonder they found out. This only happened because Jia was a once beloved writer and people loved her novels. Jia doesn't know how to respond and Yanju hangs up saying to contact him if she needs anything. Jia doesn't know what just happened. The scene shifts to Mouse encountering an unknown masked woman and Mitchiel demands to know who it is. But this is Jia and she looks like this because she's super famous online now and doesn't want to be recognized because it's a pain. Ever since the show, people keep sneaking glances at her everywhere she goes, and she regrets not giving an excuse to skip filming that day. Jia also says Mitchiel is no better because he was dressed so well that day. Why couldn't he have just worn his usual unfashionable clothes like he always does? But Mitchiel reminds her that she and his mom threw them all away many chapters ago. And after all, he had to wear something special because that was the day he could announce to the world that he was Jia's husband and he didn't want her to feel ashamed of him. With this, Jia realizes that Mitchiel, who only ever cared about his own comfort, is starting to put her first and this makes her happy. He tells Jia to not worry because she has nothing to be ashamed of and the fact that she is the writer flaming hot chicken feet is amazing and tells Jia to live her life how she wants. Jia never considered this when she escaped her isolation or during her stint in the corporate world. The question of what Jia Han wanted never crossed her mind. Jia just hated everything and as a result, ran away from everything. So Mitchiel reminds her to tell him if anything is wrong so she doesn't have to suffer alone. Jia is now happy and wonders if she should buy Mitchiel a protein shake or maybe even set the mood for the horizontal monster mash as thanks. But suddenly someone puts their hand on Jia's shoulder and it's Yanju and she looks very angry. Ever since Yanju was little, she loved writing. She was often left out due to her timid personality. but her writing was recognized, which made her recognized as well. The awards that piled up was proof of her talent, and her goal was naturally to someday become a novelist. One day when Yanju was living her normal life, she met Jia. Jia was the type of person who naturally drew people in and shined wherever she went. Yanju thought she would never get involved with someone like her. But one day, Jia confronted Yanju because they sat next to each other in class a few times, and Jia asked Yanju to cover for her attendance today. Yanju thinks something is wrong with Jia, but when the professor calls Jia's name, Yanju nervously says here, and it worked. This was Yanju's first taste of rebellion, and it made her feel a mix of thrill and guilt. This is exactly what Yanju needed to write all night. But this resulted in Yanju waking up late, and she rushes to class because the professor has a strict attendance policy. But when she arrives, the class was already over and she's devastated. But Jia actually covered for her attendance. After that day, Yanju and Jia quickly became close. They bonded over their shared love of reading novels, and Yanju nervously asked Jia to take a look at her rough draft, and Jia promised to be her #1 fan. But one day, Jia joked about giving writing a try. But that didn't remain a joke because Jia soon published her novel. Jia was the type of person who never needed to prove herself to anyone. But Yanju isn't like that. One day Jia noticed Yanju doing her makeup, which is unusual, and Yanju says it's because she's meeting Yanduek. Jia's confused why she's doing all this just to meet him on a weekend to review her work. But Yanju is insistent on looking good. Jia thinks she's overdoing it because it's not like Yanju's meeting a boyfriend. But hearing this makes Yanju blush and she rushes out the door. Jia isn't one to judge Yanju's preferences, but she wonders if Yanduek is actually single. The scene shifts to Yanju at school where her friends ask what she's been doing because her skin has been glowing lately and they demand to know her secret. This makes Yanju wonder if she's gotten prettier. They say love makes you more beautiful, and for the first time in Yanju's life, she felt love. She also can't focus on her work because she's always thinking about Yanduek. In their meeting, Yanduek mentioned how Yanju has never been in a relationship. Yanju thinks he's being rude, but he explains that she pours her soul into writing about romance, but it lacks realism due to her lack of experience. She's heard this a lot in her writing club where her colleague explained that romance is by nature and offered to personally teach her about it. But Yanduek is different because he said he really liked her writing. The protagonist is entertaining, like when she snuck into the guy's company to check up on him, and while it's a bit cliché, many readers love that. Hearing this brought Yanju to tears, and this is the first time she's cried in front of a man. From that day on, Yanju tried her best to look good for him, and even though she looked ridiculous sometimes, seeing Yanduek laugh made it all worth it. When Yanju asked Jia what she thought of love, Jia immediately thought of the Minecraft server Lovecraft, but Yanju was referring to real love. So Jia quotes a line from an old TV commercial and asks what it means to Yanju. She doesn't know what to say and says she's actually not going to tell Jia. Jia's disappointed that she got baited and goes in for a tickle attack as punishment. Yanju's life became warm again due to Yanduek. But one day when Yanju was waiting for him next to fall leaves, Yanduek showed up with his baby strapped to his chest because something came up with his wife, and Yanju's world shattered right before her eyes. The feeling of love Yanju came to know through writing as a child was something she could turn on and off anytime she wanted. But she now realizes it's not that easy as her first love ended before it even began. But this didn't make Yanju give up writing because life goes on. As time went on, Yanju debuted as an author, graduated university, and Jia disappeared. But she continued to meet with Yanduek despite her one-sided crush because no one else evaluated her work like he did. But even with Jia gone, Yanduek still praised her work because his wife was a huge fan of hers. This made Yanju feel like her writing wasn't enough, and she recalled how Jia mentioned that she wrote about stuff that she wished would happen to her. Yanju took this mentality and poured her filthy desires into her next work about an affair, and Yanduek liked it so much, he wanted to pitch it to a drama producer. This novel sold like crazy, and she wrote similar novels and dramas that also sold well, which made Yanju a rising star in the industry. But even after all her success, Yanduek never called her writing good. But she knows deep down that not being acknowledged by him is the reason she's still writing today. The scene shifts to Yanduek at a hospital and a doctor telling him that his wife's body is at its limit and surgery is not an option. Yanduek's wife was born with poor health, but she always wanted a child despite the risks. After she safely gave birth, her health rapidly deteriorated and Yanduek wanted to do everything he could to help. But her condition only ever got worse. There was only one thing his wife wanted before she passed away, the final volume of the series made by Flaming Hot Chicken Feet. Yanju thought this was an impossible request, that is until he randomly ran into Jia while exercising. Afterwards, Yanju asked Yanju to help him get Jia to write again for the sake of his wife. The scene shifts to Yanju peeling an apple for Yanju's son, and she asks if he wants to go home, but he doesn't because he doesn't like being home alone and likes being with Yanju. The fact that Yanju has looked after Yanju's child and tried her best to write something he thinks is good meant nothing because even after 7 years, she could never replace his wife. When Yanju was hearing Yanju's plan to make Jia write again, she never thought he would go as far as revealing her identity to the public. Jia is the person she admires the most, and because Yanju felt jealousy one day, she made Jia quit writing and disappear, and she thinks it's her fault. So if Yanju can help Jia write again, then it would be a small form of atonement for her actions. But she didn't want Jia to start writing again because Yanju manipulated her into doing it, which brings us back to the present. At the cafe, Yanju explains to Jia what Yanju did, and Jia thinks he has a terminal case of brain cell deficiency because she can just not go along with his plan. But Yanju doubts this because Yanju might seem like some sloppy middle-aged man, but he's actually a legend in the industry with dozens of hit works to his name due to his management skill. She asks if Jia really thinks he didn't predict she would react like this before making his move. When Jia was still writing, Yanju came to see them every week not only to review their manuscript progress, but also to take care of the writer's mental health so he has a good grasp of Jia's personality. Since Jia just got married, she also can't run away like last time. Yanju says Yanju didn't want Jia to know the real reason he wants her to write again because writing for sympathy isn't the same as writing professionally. But Jia understands where he's coming from based on her experiences with Mitchiel. Jia questions if Yanju should be telling her all this, but Yanju says she doesn't want Jia to write out of obligation but to write something she genuinely enjoys creating like before, and says that she's Flaming Hot Chicken Feet's #1 fan. So Jia says she's going to take half a day off this morning. The scene shifts to Yanju's office, and he hears noises from another room. Suddenly, Jia barges through the door with Aiyang trying to stop her and says they have something to talk about. Thank you for watching. This recap covered chapters 105 through 119 of the manhwa titled Maybe Meant to Be. Please like, subscribe or consider being a channel member to support the channel, and see you next time.